Gentlemen, you're very, very welcome. We're just waiting for a couple of more people to join, and then we can get underway. It's nice and a privilege and a pleasure to see so many of you joining us today, including some regular faces and some not so regular. But in any case, it's you're welcome along to this briefing today. We'll just give it another minute, then I'll make some formal introductions. Okay.
Alex, we have Fleur with us, so.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you to this press briefing. Escalation in Jerusalem and at the Gaza border. How did we get here, and what is the end game? Obviously, since we planned this, it's a fairly fast-moving and obviously extremely volatile situation, and we have an extra potential extra couple of guests joining, but we'll keep you up to speed as and when that happens. In the meantime, we are joined by two eminent and respected speakers. Before we get into that and we get this briefing underway, because I'm sure your time is precious. My name is Alex Benjamin. I'm the director here at Europe-Israel Press Association. And the way we do our, these briefings is that you can see the chat facility. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and then I can call you directly. It also helps us enormously because some of you are maybe using sons, daughters, or nicknames for your iPads or whatever devices that you're using. It also helps us enormously if you can put your name and media outlet sort of stapled to your question. And if your question is addressed to a specific speaker, then by all means, let's do that as well. So our two speakers today, first is Jerusalem's Deputy Mayor, who's responsible for foreign relations, economic development and tourism, is Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. She's been a Jerusalem City Council member since 2016. And prior to that, she headed up the European desk at the Jerusalem's Development Corporation and also served as a communications consultant for various corporations and NGOs. Prior to her deputy mayoralty in 2018, Fleur led the City Council's opposition. And we're also joined by Khaled Abu Toameh. A lot of you will already know Khaled. He's a veteran award-winning journalist who's been covering Palestinian affairs for nearly 3 decades. He studied at Hebrew U, began his career as a reporter working for a PLO-affiliated newspaper in Jerusalem, and he currently works and comments for a variety of international media, serving as the eyes and ears of foreign journalists around the world, including Wall Street Journal, Sunday Times of London, etc., and he writes on Palestinian affairs for the Jerusalem Post and also happens to be a resident of East Jerusalem. So with those introductions out of the way, it is my pleasure to give the floor to our first speaker, Jerusalem's Deputy Mayor, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Fleur, you're very, very welcome to this briefing. It's a pleasure to have you. I wish it was under more pleasant circumstances, but we are where we are. Can you share with us kind of a background to how we got here and how things have been in the city, and what was the spark that lit the flame, if you will?
Well, I think it's, first of all, thank you so much, Alex, and thanks to Tal from your office here and all the EIPA people doing the work that you do. It's a good question, but I think we have to look at it in a different way. I don't think there's one thing that sparked the flame. I think it's a combination of a number of things, opportune time for the Palestinian Authority to cause the trouble they wanted to cause, and Hamas to cause the trouble that they wanted to cause. So I just want to start a little bit macro and then go down to the micro, and I'm happy to discuss all the painful issues, including Sheikh Jarrah and anything else. But I want to just start for a second with a macro lens, which I'm sure also our friend Khaled can elaborate a little bit later. The macro lens is that both the PA and Hamas, for different reasons, and I'll explain for them in a second, were looking to inflame fires. They were looking to cause some trouble for different reasons. The reason the Palestinian Authority is interested in a conflict right now is because they want to avoid an election. The Palestinian Authority knows that they're not doing so well in terms of the popularity of their chances at the moment. They've been 17, 18 years without an election. They're trying, they said this to an election to impress the Biden administration to say, look how wonderful we are. We're even democratic, we can have elections. But they really never really wanted to. And the truth is, the polling and the people are showing that they might not do so well, and they're actually in danger of losing a lot of support. So that's the Palestinian Authority right now. Of course, for them, a very handy excuse has been the issue of the voting in Jerusalem. So the voting in Jerusalem has been something that for many, many years has happened. People vote, East Jerusalem Arab residents voting in Palestinian Authority elections, well, has happened. The last time was 17 years ago. And the truth is that it's much more hype than what it is significant. It's almost like an empty battle because there's only about 6,000 people in East Jerusalem who can or should vote via postal polling stations. 150,000 people or 100 to 150,000 people who can vote can simply drive for 15 minutes, 20 minutes to Ramallah and vote. So it's not a question of a critical mass of people who can't vote if Israel doesn't allow them. I'm also not so convinced Israel would have stopped this completely. It's one of those things that didn't get organized. I didn't hear strong statements from any Israeli official to say we're not having elections. It was one of those things that was up in the air. They're grabbing onto that and saying, oh, well then if East Jerusalem's not part of it, then we're not having an election. Now, just to strengthen why it's so ridiculous, East Jerusalem is not run by the Palestinian Authority on a day-to-day. It's run by the Jerusalem municipality. The residents pay property taxes to the Jerusalem municipality. They get health services, transport, public spaces, all that from the municipality. Of course, we can always do better. Of course, there's been many years that they haven't had the equal resources. All this, I am happy to put a mirror in front of our face and say, we could have done better. But what I can tell you is that for the last 5 years, certainly since I've been in City Hall, and since Zev Elkin, who's now gone to the Sar Party, but who was originally a Likud member of a Likud minister, when he was Jerusalem Affairs Minister, he brought in unprecedented budgets for East Jerusalem in order to close social gaps. He brought money for infrastructural development, for education, and for quality employment. A lot of very significant amounts of money. And the philosophy was, well, you can't on the one hand say it's one city and on the other hand, not distribute resources equally. And so that's 100% correct. And we've been working for 5 years to strengthen leadership connections, civil society, spiritual leaders. And we've really created some very, very strong bridges with civil society. I've got to say, we live in such a dichotomous world that, Monday night, there's a rocket flying in the vicinity of Jerusalem, and Tuesday morning, I'm meeting in Abu Tor in a mixed Jewish Arab neighborhood where the city has just opened up an innovation center. We're finding ways to help the local population. But that's the life that we lead here. On a day-to-day, we're working, we're living, same cafes and same shopping malls and gyms and everything else. Jews and Arabs living in one city. And then, of course, you have all the different troublemakers that started, that have been inflamed, that have been encouraged. I'm convinced that Hamas, and I've heard reports that Hamas have been very diligently working behind the scenes to, take a group of troublemakers and turn this thing into a very deliberate confrontation. So that's on the macro level. And I just have to say that I think for both these parties, there's a couple of disturbing things going on that they don't like. And that is the rapprochement up until this moment between Jews and Arabs in general. We have the Abraham Accords, which has been a game-changing process, where the Palestinian agenda has been left aside, and we're moving forward with peace with our regional partners, and that's going very well. Some of you may know I'm very involved in that. I set up a couple of organizations, and I'm very involved in those type of peace-building measures. The second thing is something nobody imagined, that in an Israeli election, the Arab parties, especially one particular party, which is like the Muslim Brotherhood Light, is actually considering joining an Israeli government, and almost no party is against it. That is completely, we're in new territory. So that is another type of rapprochement that, of course, Hamas and the PA doesn't like, because again, these things make them irrelevant. And the third thing is what I mentioned earlier, which is what we've been doing in Jerusalem, creating ties, trying to distribute resources more equally. We've seen a record number of young Arab East Jerusalemites in colleges and universities in the city. I'm pushing forward programs for integration into big high-tech companies. There's so much going on. There's so much going on in the city. And I think that these things are disturbing to a group whose philosophy was backed by Iran, helped by Turkey, other Muslim Brotherhood countries, and whose whole philosophy is, just let's, denial that, educational system that denies we even exist, and that the only solution is really kicking Israel out. And so that doesn't fit in to that agenda. And I think these are some of the reasons why they've actively looked for a confrontation. If I have a few more minutes, I'll explain the micro elements of these stories, which are, Damascus Gate, Sheikh Jarrah, and Temple Mount. I'll just explain that briefly, and I'd be really happy to hear what Khaled has to say about all these things. Let's start with Sheikh Jarrah. Painful story. I think some of you may know the background. The background is that before 1948, this area called Sheikh Jarrah was called Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous. It's because Simon is buried there, and a group of Sephardi Mizrahi Jews bought land from the Ottomans late 19th century, and during the 1948 War of Independence, which is the war that was launched against Israel the moment that we declared independence, the Jordanian armies occupied the east part of Jerusalem, which was originally supposed to be in the UN plan given to Israel. So they illegally occupied East Jerusalem from 48 to 67, and they let families move in. They're like, move in. Now, this is not a case of a competing property claim. There's absolutely no competing property claim, because the families who've been living there have zero proof of any type of ownership, and they know it, and so do their lawyers. And this has been going on for years. It's been going on since, I think, late 80s even. And originally, the Israeli courts found what I believe to be an equitable solution. And that is, look, this is the compromise. You have rights of residency, we have rights of ownership. You don't mess with our rights, we won't mess with your rights. How do we do this? There's legal tools, protected tenancy, compensation, whatever it is. And this is what was being discussed in this compromise. What happens? The families originally accept, they understand they don't have a leg to stand on in terms of proving ownership. And then what happens? the PA and the different Palestinian leaders send their lawyers in. These families are bullied into not accepting the compromise. And this thing has been bounced around, until to the upper courts for the last few decades. And at every single juncture, compromises that have been offered have been rejected. Now, I feel extremely sympathetic towards these families, because this family has become a political football for the Palestinian Authority, for the Palestinian leadership. Ultimately, we know that the leaders that unfortunately have cursed the Palestinian people are quite happy to throw these families under the bus in order to score some political points, even though there was a decent and elegant legal compromise offered, which unfortunately wasn't taken. Now, I, as a Jew who understands what expulsion is, this is something that it's gut-wrenching. It's gut-wrenching. But the question again is, who are the people who are creating this situation for these poor, helpless families? And if Israel should be doing better, I don't know. Now let's talk a second about Damascus Gate, which is I think is the origin of the.
If you please, Fleur, thank you for this thorough introduction to put us all on the same page. But I would like, please, to get back to you in a minute and ask Khaled, who is sitting and, as I understand, actually looks at the Temple Mount at Al-Aqsa Mosque from his balcony. Khaled, could you refer to the situation as you see it right now?
First of all, I see that the mosque is still there.
The mosque is still there. That's a good news.
And, this whole thing reminds me of the Second Intifada. People probably forgot, but the Second Intifada was called the Al-Aqsa Intifada. And I was there when Ariel Sharon, then the leader of the opposition, visited the area, the Al-Aqsa mosque compound, or the Temple Mount. It was a brief visit that lasted for a few minutes, and then he left. But what was the reaction by the Palestinian Authority back then, Hamas and the other Palestinian leaders? What did they tell the Palestinians? The Jews are preparing to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Sharon is going to bulldoze our mosque. And when people hear these things, they take to the streets. And they did take to the streets, and they protested against Israel's ostensible or alleged plan back then to destroy the mosque. One thing led to another, and we found ourselves in the midst of something called the Al-Aqsa Intifada. The Intifada to prevent Israel from destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, 4,000 Palestinians were killed during that Intifada. I think more than 1,000 Israeli Jews were also killed during that Intifada. And as you said, I look from my window right now, and I see that the mosque is still there. So what happened? This is, as Fleur correctly pointed out, this is the result of ongoing incitement by Palestinian leadership, whether it's the PLO or Hamas, against Israel. This is how Palestinian leaders use the issue of Jerusalem, how they use the issue of Al-Aqsa and other holy sites to incite the people against Israel. Of course, with the aim of delegitimizing Israel, demonizing Jews, and trying to drag the Arab and Muslim world into a confrontation with Israel. That has always been part of the Palestinian strategy. By shouting out and calling out, oh, Al-Aqsa is in danger. This is Islam's third holiest site. Where are the Arabs? Where are the 1.3 or 4 billion Muslims? You need to come and defend your holy site. You need to, in other words, you need to come and wage war against Israel. Where are the Muslim armies that are supposed to march on Jerusalem to save this mosque? So back then, as I said, we had the second intifada, the Al-Aqsa intifada. It ended at one point after 4 or 5 years, but both Jews and Arabs paid a very heavy price as a result of Palestinian leadership's attempt or effort, which was to a certain extent successful back then, to drag us into a confrontation with Israel. Now, some people would tell you, okay, it was immediately after the Camp David summit. Yasser Arafat came back from Camp David. He didn't get what he wanted. So, okay, I mean, that's also true. Arafat did not get what he wanted from Clinton. I remember I was in Ramallah back then. We went to interview Arafat to ask him what happened at Camp David. And he said, the Jews tried to deceive me. Clinton lied to me. They did not give me what I want. They wanted me to give up the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They wanted me to share this holy site with them. And who am I, Yasser Arafat, to make any concessions in Jerusalem on behalf of billions of Muslims? If I do that, I will be shot. I will be killed. And we saw the tensions back then building up. It was very clear that Yasser Arafat back then was trying to use the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the issue of Jerusalem as an excuse to instigate some kind of a mini uprising, he probably thought back then, against Israel, with the goal of trying to extort more concessions. Because the position of the Palestinian leadership back then was, okay, if we were offered 95, 93% at Camp David, maybe with a little more pressure, with a little more violence, with one more intifada, we might get 100% or even 110%. That was the thinking back then. Now, we come to what is happening right now. I was talking to my editor today, and he was telling me, the editor of the Jerusalem Post, he said, Khaled, I've been covering this conflict for 20 years, and I feel that we keep writing the same story. I told him, Yaakov, I've been covering this conflict for 39 years, and I feel that there's always repetition. And what we are witnessing right now is something very similar to what we have witnessed in the past. Those who have been following the rhetoric of Palestinian leadership, of Palestinian media, of the Palestinian Authority, of Hamas in recent weeks, could easily see that we were headed towards some kind of a confrontation with Israel. Mahmoud Abbas, as Fleur also correctly pointed out, he was waiting for an opportunity to cancel an election that he never wanted in the first place. The only reason why he called these elections was because of pressure from the European Union, and in order, again, to use Fleur's words, to impress the Biden administration. These were the only two reasons. Otherwise, this man, who is now in his 16th year of his 4-year term in office, was never really interested in any kind of an election. The Europeans pushed him towards it, and he felt that he got himself into a trap. And he was searching from day one for ways to rid himself of this crisis. If he really wanted to ensure the participation of the East Jerusalemites in the election, he should have worked that out with Israel before. Why do you declare elections when you are not sure about the participation of East Jerusalemites? That's number one. Number two, he declared these elections without solving his dispute with Hamas, which was a very important issue. The Palestinians are physically and politically divided into two separate entities, one in Gaza and one in the West Bank. Thirdly, and most importantly, in the past, only a few thousand residents of East Jerusalem participated in Palestinian elections. So their participation would not, or non-participation would not have actually changed anything. And again, Fleur correctly pointed out, only 6,000 Palestinians were supposed to vote through the Israeli post offices in East Jerusalem. The remaining 150,000 eligible voters could have walked. They didn't even have to drive. Many of them could have walked to any polling station in an area around Jerusalem, in Palestinian Authority-controlled areas, and voted there or ran in the election. Israel, there's no way that Israel could have prevented them from doing that. So Mahmoud Abbas, as I said, was waiting for an opportunity. He knew that Hamas was going to win the election. His biggest fear was the split in Fatah and his ruling Fatah faction. Fatah was running under 3 different lists in this election. One led by Mahmoud Abbas loyalists. We're talking about the veteran Fatah leadership, Jibril Rajoub, Mahmoud al-Alul, I don't know, Abu this and Abu that, all these Abus that we've been dealing with in the last 30 and 40 years. They you know, these people, they just don't move on. They don't change. And they you know, I've been covering Palestinian issues for nearly 40 years now. And it's the same people. It's the same people I'm dealing with. I met Abu Mazen in 1991. I remember. And all the people around him are still there. They don't want to move on. They don't want to pave the way for the emergence of new leadership. So because of the split, the first list was headed by Mahmoud Abbas loyalists. Then Mahmoud Abbas received a very serious blow when Marwan Barghouti, the Tanzim leader who is in Israeli prison serving multiple life sentences for murder, joined forces with Nasser al-Qudwa, a nephew of Arafat, and they formed their own list. And list number 3, the Fatah affiliated list of Muhammad Dahlan, the exiled Fatah leader living in the United Arab Emirates. Now, when you have your own faction fragmented and divided, and you see that many of your own supporters are leaving you, what does that mean? It means that there's a very good chance that Hamas would win the election. In 2006, the last parliamentary election that the Palestinians had, Hamas won that election because of divisions in Fatah, because many Fatah people ran on independent lists back then. And Mahmoud Abbas is not stupid. He saw that he was headed towards another catastrophe for Fatah. Now, okay, you want to cancel the elections. That's good, but I can understand him. But why turn it into a campaign against Israel? Why put all the blame on Israel? You know, ironically, many Palestinians don't buy that. They know that Mahmoud Abbas was afraid of the election. They know that Mahmoud Abbas was never really serious about the election. But what he did in his speech on April 29 in Ramallah was to unleash a wave of incitement, very harsh rhetoric against Israel, accusing Israel of obstructing Palestinian democracy, saying that Israel does not want us to hold elections, and more seriously, accusing Israel of carrying out a scheme to Judaize Jerusalem.
Okay.
And now all this, you know, you could see the tension building up. You could see that he was trying to distract attention, and by diverting all the anger, not towards Israel. He saw that Palestinians were very frustrated because of the postponement of the election. And the best way to avoid a Palestinian intifada against the Palestinian leadership is by telling your people, it's not me, it's the Jews. Go there, go fight against Israel. Israel wants to destroy the mosque, Israel, and look where we are now.
So it seems like, Khaled, like a classic case of misdirection, I think is what the magicians call it, when sort of look over here and you don't see what their hands are doing. Khaled, thank you for that, because we've had a sort of a bit of a retrospective look of how we got up to here. Because it's a fast-moving, evolving situation, we're joined by, and he jumped in briefly earlier on, my colleague Tal Rabina. Tal is our director of strategy based in Israel, just outside Tel Aviv. Tal, I'm going to hand over to you to sort of take the briefing sort of to where we are today. We heard from our two speakers, and I'm sure we'll have some questions shortly for both. But to sort of update us to where things stand at the current moment. Tal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I won't waste your time for that, but I do have, and very proud to have, a real senior military commander here in Israel, very senior journalist from Yediot Achronot and Ynet, the most popular newspaper, and a very respected person some of you might know. Ron Ben Ishai is with us, and Ron, Khaled mentioned experience of about 40 years telling the same story. Could you please update us? How do you see the things as they are right now?
It is not exactly the same stories, because Gaza is not the same. Gaza is under the rule of Hamas, who is a Muslim Brotherhood organization, and the Hamas has aspiration to take over the Palestinian leadership, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, and they are using Al-Aqsa with a religious motive, as Khaled said so correctly, to gather the Palestinians also in Israel. Palestinians who are citizens of Israel around them, using the religious argument, the religious element, to get some, how shall I say, a cohesive, idealistic focus to gather around, and using their military force in order to show that they are not only talking like Mahmoud Abbas and others, but they are actually defending Al-Aqsa with their bodies and their weapons. And this is the background of what is going on in Gaza Strip and in Israel now. As a matter of fact, I would describe it as a campaign started by Hamas, shooting or launching heavy rockets, missiles actually, towards Jerusalem. They didn't reach Jerusalem because it's too far for the missiles, but, or maybe they didn't want to hit by mistake some Palestinians in East Jerusalem, I don't know. But they didn't get it to Jerusalem, but they said explicitly, and Hania, their leader in Gaza, said that they unite, they are now defending Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah, which means Jerusalem, with their missiles that they are shooting into Israel, into the Israeli states and on Israeli citizens. The IDF, the Israeli army, was ready for them. As a matter of fact, for a long time, they know, the Israeli intelligence community, but specifically the military intelligence and the Shabak, the GSS, the General Security Service, know that the Hamas was preparing such a thing, but they thought that Hamas now is more interested in easing the misery of the Palestinians in Gaza, both because of the COVID pandemic and the inherent misery, economic and social misery in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. And Israel, as a matter of fact, for many years bribed Hamas by offering Hamas many benefits in exchange for a ceasefire, as a matter of fact. And it succeeded, this method of bringing, as a matter of fact, Israel didn't bribe Hamas directly with the Israeli money, but with Qatari money that Israel solicited from the Qatari ruler and let the Qatari representative bring it to Gaza, $30 million each month, $30 million each month, bringing it to Gaza in cash in a suitcase. And Israel added other things that the Hamas wanted, making the fishing in the Mediterranean in a long distance, fishing opposite to the Gaza beach, and other benefits. I don't want to talk too much, but many benefits. And
on with your permission, as we are a very dynamic brief this time because of the situation, I see we have for a very short period of time the IDF international spokesperson with us, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. So if you please just hold at this point. And Jonathan, hello, do you hear us? I see you are
Yes.
out there.
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Hello, Tal. Hello, everybody.
Hello, and thank you so much. We know you are very, very busy, and we appreciate your time with us. So please, could you just update us about the military situation as of this moment? We heard that about an hour ago, there were another severe missile attack on Ashdod.
Indeed. So I'm standing in a town in Israel called Yehud, which was hit yesterday, and you can see the damage here. A house behind me, a private residence. It used to be a two-story house. You see that most of the second story was totally obliterated by a direct impact of a rocket fired yesterday and around 3 a.m. Luckily, the family here was disciplined and quick enough to use their own residential shelter that almost all houses in Israel have. And they were inside their shelter when the rocket hit, and that's what saved them. And they were able to exit the house unharmed, which really is outstanding. In terms of the general situation on the ground, more than 1,100 rockets have been fired since Hamas started their attack on Israel more than 40 hours ago, 6 p.m. on Monday, with the rockets fired towards Jerusalem. Since then, they've fired lots of rockets. An interesting fact, which I think is underreported in international media, is the rate of rockets that are fired by terrorists in Gaza, but that fall short inside Gaza. And we're talking about 200 rockets. Out of those 1,000 or 1,100 rockets that have been fired, 200 and perhaps even more actually fall short, land inside Gaza. And our assessment is that they are responsible for at least some of the civilian casualties that are reported in Gaza by Hamas's authorities. And that's an important part. In terms of otherwise, IDF activity, or the Iron Dome first. The Iron Dome continues to be very effective despite this very massive and continuous onslaught of rockets that are fired almost relentlessly at various locations in Israel. The Iron Dome continues to be very effective with an interception rate of around 90%. And that is simply outstanding, saving lives every second, every day. And I can assure you all that the situation would have been totally different had we not had the Iron Dome against these brutal attacks. In terms of Israeli activity, we've struck more than 300 different military targets inside the Gaza Strip using the Air Force. We have struck manufacturing sites of weapons, storage facilities where Hamas and the Islamic Jihad store their weapons. We have struck, and very importantly, we're hunting terrorists. We have been able to kill quite a few, both senior and then let's call it working level terrorists. We're commanders as well as rank and file from different parts of Hamas, rocket launchers, anti-tank missile squads, tunnelers, etc., etc. And
Jonathan,
it seems that
Jonathan, I understand you are just handling or would just conclude what might be called one-of-a-kind operation in Gaza.
Yeah, that's where I'm exactly what I was about to speak about. So when we're hunting terrorists, we're doing it together with the ISA, the Internal Security Agency, relying on excellent real-time intelligence. And we've now been able to deal a severe blow to Hamas because we have been able to kill a number of what you could call the general staff of Hamas, very senior military leaders of Hamas that we located the hideout where they were hiding and were able to strike that location and subsequently kill them. So we've been bombing tunnels, we've been bombing rocket launchers, we have been bombing manufacturing sites, and we have also struck various targets where Hamas uses civilian infrastructure. This has created quite a lot of international attention, and I'm sure you've seen the first pages of all of the newspapers and lots of the TV coverage. A big house in Gaza attacked from the air and then crumbling down. And there's been criticism. I'd like to address that criticism and say that if you look and ask questions specifically, then you'll see that not even one single Gazan civilian was injured in any of those two attacks on those big buildings that we struck. First of all, they're military targets because they're used by Hamas for military purposes, intelligence, counterintelligence, operations in Judea and Samaria, and for planning. And that's why we struck them. But before we struck, we made sure that there were no civilians there. First by warning shots, missiles from the air, and then also by phone calls to Gazan civilians, making sure that they're out of the area and that they stay clear. And that's how we've been able to reach zero civilian casualties there. And that should be a clear indicator of our attention to detail and how much we mind and how much we try to minimize the amount of non-combatants that are involved in fighting. Last words, we are attacking the terrorists all across Gaza, underground and above ground. We will continue to do so. We are trying to suppress their ability to fire rockets. They still have the ability, but we are actively engaging in order to try to suppress it and are gearing up and preparing to broaden our activities should that be needed. I have time for a few questions and then I'll have to move on. Tal, you run this.
Yeah, thank you. So we have Anna Benedict. Are you here and you can ask your questions? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. It's about demonstrations in Haifa and other place in the country.
So maybe we'll wait with this question with your permission afterwards. So we'll let Lieutenant Colonel Conricus to answer the military questions. Any other person who would like to address the Lieutenant Colonel before we send him back to the field?
Cal, there's a question from Harold Hyman. So
Please.
Harold, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. I just was wondering, is there a possibility of a land offensive inside Gaza as there was in 2014? Simple question.
Yes, the possibility exists. We have the capabilities, we have the weapons, we have the manpower, we have the resolve and everything needed. So far, that is not the intention. We are conducting a massive campaign, an aerial campaign against Hamas's targets, and we're not seeking to escalate the situation in that way. But if it will be needed, if Hamas aggression will continue, if there will be a threat against Israeli civilians along the border, or an intensification in the fighting, then we're a military, and of course that's what we are trained, equipped, and prepared to do. So that's the situation.
Alex, another military question?
Yes, Daniel Mosseri. Daniel, unmute yourself, please, sir.
Yes, hello, thank you, Colonel. My question is, are you impressed by the capacity of Hamas to fire this many rockets, or were you expecting that? What I mean is this: you said you're trying to prevent them to fire more rockets into Israel, but I'm not sure. This is the first time I hear that, and every time they show this great capacity. So how do they do that? And also you said you've been bombing tunnels, but then again, in the past, we were hearing that Israel had discovered all the tunnels. So it seems like this is a never-ending process. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you, Daniel, for your question. We're dealing with a very committed, ruthless terrorist organization that doesn't spare any of its resources in order to promote its jihadi agenda. They prefer to spend money on rockets, on tunnels, on bombs instead of their infrastructure. And as such, they have quite a lot of rockets and they have quite a lot of tunnels. We never said that we exposed and destroyed all of the tunnels. What we have said is that we now have an underground wall which allows us to detect any tunnel being dug and block it. And again, that has been proven effective because we detected the tunnel and we struck it. And other than that, no, I'm not surprised by their capacity. I'm not surprised by the fact that they try to use these weapons in order to kill our civilians. It is very regrettable that these are the choices that Hamas makes, because eventually those who will suffer from it are Hamas and the local population inadvertently in Gaza, which is very, very unfortunate.
Thank you, Aurora. Go ahead, Alex, please.
No, I was just going to say Aurora Minguez and from Spanish National Radio, and then we have one more for the Lieutenant Colonel, and then I guess you have to go, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Just had a briefing in Madrid with the Israeli ambassador here in Spain, and she said what we are seeing now, it's a kind of general test for a possible future war, Israel-Iran. Do you think this is a kind of general test? Is something a kind of preparation? Everybody's testing rockets and contra-rockets and the shields and so on?
I don't know exactly what that ambassador said, but I'll tell you the IDF's perspective. Iran is part of the issue here, but they are not directly involved so far. Iran is involved in the fact that they have been funding and equipping Hamas and the Islamic Jihad for many years. They have been providing weapons and money and military knowledge, how to build weapons and how to use them. But in this case, in terms of an active Iranian involvement, that is not the case. And we don't see it as any warm-up for an engagement with Iran. When we think about the Iranian threat, it's a totally different scope, right? That's a nation state with nation state capabilities, with nuclear military aspirations, and with an abundance of proxy forces that they are very happy to use against Israel, and with rockets of totally different caliber and size. So no, I'd say that's not really the same thing altogether.
Okay. Thank you, Tal. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in very, very briefly for the last question, and then Tal, please wrap it up. I heard you, Lieutenant Colonel, this morning on BBC World Service. You got a similar question to the one that Nagila from the Czech news agency is asking, which I'm going to take the time to read. According to the health authorities in Gaza, there are children amongst the casualties in Gaza. Would you like to comment?
We've seen those reports, and we take those reports very seriously. Our intent is to minimize collateral damage, women, children, any non-combatants. And as I explained before, we go to great lengths in order to minimize the risk. The fact of the matter is that Hamas is embedded on purpose within the civilian population, and they're using civilian infrastructure as their human shields, and making it almost impossible to strike military targets without any collateral damage. I think that so far the numbers, without being cynical, I think that the numbers are so far quite good, because we have killed more than 20 terrorists, known terrorists, and there's a relatively small amount of civilians that are killed. That, of course, doesn't mean that anybody killed is taken lightly, but it is a very complex situation, and I can assure you that we are committed to international law of armed conflict, and that we aspire to the smallest possible amount of collateral damage. Thank you, everybody. I wish you all the best, and I'm moving on to the next endeavor. Shalom.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you for your time. I'll go back to the question, with your permission, Alex, about the Israeli Arabs, and I would like three angles round of answers from Fleur, Khaled, and Ron. Each of you, please, from your aspect. Maybe Fleur, you would like to refer to it in the first place vis-a-vis the Jerusalem situation.
Well, we have intelligence that the majority of the troublemakers were not actually from East Jerusalem. They were sent by all sorts of agents. I'm not saying there's no troublemakers in East Jerusalem. There's troublemakers everywhere in Jerusalem, in general, Jew or Arab. But what we found was, and this is what the mayor reported to me, that there were a lot of troublemakers being bussed in from the north of Israel. And one of the reasons why those buses on last Shabbat was stopped on Highway 1 and from getting into the city was because there was specific intelligence about people coming in to cause trouble and to vandalism and violence. And so that, look, I have a dichotomy of a reality here. I'm a Jerusalemite. I work every day with colleagues within City Hall and out of City Hall from East Jerusalem. We've just opened a youth center there, the first of its kind in Shuafat, 2 weeks ago. We're building a high-tech park in Wadi Joz. We're doing so much with local partners that I feel that my reality is not what I'm seeing on the TV screens of, people rioting, whether it's in Lod or whether it's in Jerusalem. So I think we have to separate the people with a specific agenda being incited by bigger bodies than them, normally young, vulnerable youth, it happens, from the regular mainstream Arab Israelis who are, just want to do what the rest of us want to do and get on with their day. It's still difficult for me because I truly do believe that we were going through an internal Abraham Accords here with the Arab Israelis, through some of their leaders, political leaders. And so it's very difficult for me to see what's going on. Of course, it's horrific to see the destruction of synagogues. But like Khaled said, when these people have been told you're fighting for Jerusalem, you're fighting for Al-Aqsa, they're gonna, it's easy to bring people into that religious fervor, especially in the month of Ramadan. So I'm just hoping that this is a blip, that this is localized to certain troublemakers, and that it doesn't spread in the mainstream Arab Israeli society, because that's certainly not the people that I know, that I work with, and that I consider myself friends.
Thank you for that. Khaled?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, as a resident of East Jerusalem and as a citizen of Israel, that I'm also worried. I'm also worried about what we saw in the last few days, the involvement of Arab Israelis or East Jerusalem residents, who are not Israeli citizens, by the way, in the rioting and in the violence. Now, I would like to be a bit careful and warn against generalizations, because what you see on TV is not always representative of the reality. I still believe that the vast majority of the Arab citizens of Israel, including the residents of East Jerusalem, are not, supportive of the violence. I've heard in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, since the beginning of the rioting in Jerusalem, I've heard other voices from residents of East Jerusalem attacking the rioters, saying, you are destroying Ramadan, you are preventing us from celebrating, there is no need for this, you are destroying the economy. Usually during Ramadan, you have a lot of activity, commercial activity, economic activity. Now we are one day before Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim feast, at the end of Ramadan, and usually the markets are open and people are shopping, but a small group, and it's really a small group of people, maybe from East Jerusalem, some of them, others from the Muslim the Islamic movement inside Israel, they decided to instigate the violence. It started with on the pretext that Israel was preventing them from celebrating Ramadan at the Damascus Gate by placing barriers there. Then Israel removed the barriers. Then we saw that the riots and the violence continued. So it was not really about the barriers. I don't know, the general what worries me is that these people are being brainwashed. They are being exposed to all this incitement by the Palestinian Authority, by Hamas, and sadly by the leaders of some of the leaders of the Arab community inside Israel. What also worries me is that I haven't seen leaders of the Arab community inside Israel come out very strongly, denouncing what we saw yesterday on the streets of Haifa, Lud, Ramle, and other cities. I would like to see the leaders come out and speak out. This is very harmful for the Arab community inside Israel. The Arabs inside Israel, they are fighting for integration. They are not fighting for separation from Israel. And I still believe that there are many sane and rational voices among them. This rioting or this violence erupted at a time when we were led to believe that the Israeli Arabs have taken a new direction. And what do I mean by that? We saw the results of the last election in Israel. We saw that many people did not vote for the joint list, which consisted of 4 parties back then, because they were upset with Ahmad Tibi and the other representatives for representing the PLO and Hamas and not the interests of the Arab Israelis. Then we became a bit more optimistic when we saw that Mansour Abbas ran on a ticket that said, vote for me, I want integration, I want to be part of the decision-making process in Israel. So more than 150,000 Arab Israelis voted for that agenda, which was saying, we want to be part of the Israeli political system. So that gave us some hope. I hope that what we saw in the last few days, in the last 2 days, will be contained, will end, and that the Arab Israelis will realize that this is not in their interest.
Thank you so much. And Alex, let's go back to our guests, journalist guests. Questions?
Okay. So thank you, Tal, for handling that rather quick and fast-moving situation. I almost feel like we're in a newsroom. Anne Benedict Hoffner, we didn't get a chance to get with your question. Would you like to re-ask it if you're still with us, Anne Benedict?
Yes, I'm still with you, but you answered my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, with pleasure. So Sabine Arnaud from Challenge in Paris. Are you with us, Sabine? And would you like to answer? Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Thank you very much first for this very, very interesting and accurate meeting. I was wondering how you analyze the role of the government, especially the Israeli government, especially Netanyahu, knowing that he is in a very tricky personal situation from a political and legal point of view. So is this a good getaway for him to gain popularity, or do you think he's just handling the situation which is crisis and that's all? Thank you very much.
I think, if I may, I'll suggest Khaled, if you want to deal with that one, because it might put our deputy mayor of Jerusalem in a somewhat awkward position.
She doesn't look.
Yes,
she doesn't seem shy. She doesn't seem shy. I think she will have an answer as well.
I'm sorry to ask this question, but from seen out of Israel, it's a question that everybody is asking himself.
Sabine, in EIPA, we are not sorry for asking questions. This is what we are here for, and please feel free to ask anything. Please, Khaled, go ahead.
I'm not an expert on Israeli politics and or Netanyahu, but I can tell you that we are doing Netanyahu injustice. This doesn't really serve Netanyahu's interest. Netanyahu did not initiate it. He did not foresee it. I'm sure he would have preferred that this did not take place, this flare-up of violence. I don't see how it could really serve his interests. For Hamas and the Palestinian Authority and Islamic Jihad, there is no difference between Netanyahu or Yair Lapid or Benny Gantz. You just need to listen to them to see that they see all of these people in the Israeli government as an enemy. They do not distinguish between one and another. So I would, be very careful about trying to put all the blame on Netanyahu or say that he benefits from this, or even insinuate that he is in some ways trying to drag this on because it serves his political agenda. I'm not one of those who buy this, by the way.
Okay, thank you, Khaled.
I wasn't putting the blame on anybody. Just
you're not the one, but there are people who are trying to put the blame.
Yeah, I can bet. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fleur, would you like to refer?
Look, I'm a politician. I'm also part of the Likud party, so I'm putting my my allegiances. I think that what this does, it makes life for Bennett, who looked to be in the cusp of forming a government this week, in a very difficult position. I don't see how Bennett can now sell to his constituents, to his public, which is mainly a right-wing public, that he can't convince Gideon Sa'ar to come in to a Netanyahu government to deal with this, or otherwise set a government with the left-wing Israeli parties plus Mansour Abbas, which is essentially Muslim Brotherhood. So I think this makes life very difficult for Bennett, which in turn may do some good to Bibi's political situation. But I want to go to what Khaled said. This is not why this is happening. This is not something instigated. This is not something that Netanyahu expected. And I think it would be very cynical somehow to hint that that he's involved in this. But I think, I'm not sure it does him any good, but it certainly doesn't do his detractors any good either. So I guess by default that's better for him.
Fleur, just
if I may, Alex, if I may just put my 5 cents in this one, I just, if I may, personal note. You remember the house that Lieutenant Colonel Conricus was standing in front of? Actually, it's about 500 meters from my house, where I'm talking with you all right now. 3 a.m. this morning, when there was a hit there, my house, again, approximately 500 meters from that house, shake that much that the last thing I was thinking about was politics. So this is to begin with. You must understand this is the reality right now. Since of yesterday evening, there is really kind of politics aside, as much as one can say such a cynical sentence, but indeed for the majority of the population of Israel, it's coming lower at the Maslow scale, and we start feeling, not even if we are not talking about it, we start feeling survival. Okay, so this is to begin with. The second thing, and I would like Khaled maybe to refer to it, it seems that there was a great new era between the relationships, the relationship between Arabs and Jews because of the corona, because of the mutual interest, because of there was so many Arab medical staff helping Jews and vice versa. Do you think we are breaking here something, or do you think that the relationship can be in some way overcome these current events?
Yes, I believe that, and I also hope that we will overcome this crisis. We've been through similar crises in the past. We all remember the events of October 2000 when riots erupted among the Arab Israelis during the second Intifada. It took some time, but eventually things got back on track, and the relations between Jews and Arabs inside Israel started, improving. In recent years, we've seen a significant improvement. We've seen Arab Israelis being integrated, being welcomed into the Israeli establishment, into the Israeli diplomatic corps, and into many other sectors. The coronavirus did bring Israelis or Jews and Arabs even closer together. I believe that that despite the current tensions, the relations between Jews and Arabs in general will remain good. I live in a Jewish neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And I can tell you that I have a very good relation with my Jewish neighbors. I didn't see anyone complain or anything. But there is this constant attempt by extremists, especially on the Palestinian side, to damage relations between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. Hamas and the PLO have always had an interest in dragging the Arab Israelis or the Arab citizens of Israel into a confrontation with Israel. And that's why I said the Arab Israelis need to be very careful. We are Israeli citizens, we are loyal citizens. It's okay to support the Palestinian demands. It's okay to support, to identify with Palestinian aspirations and things like that. But Arab Israelis need to be very careful about crossing the red line. So I still believe that, and from my experience, that things will go back on track. It might take some time, but don't worry, things will go back, and we will see Jews and Arabs getting closer together.
I hope so, Khaled. I hope so, and it's certainly what Fleur was saying earlier on as well, that it's actually in some people's strategic interest to undo a lot of this good work that's been done in education on COVID, on some of the issues that the deputy mayor was talking about right at the outset of this briefing. There's a couple of people with their hands up. What I'm going to suggest is we do a quick round of questions, one after the other, and then we can sort of divvy them up, because so we'll do that. Jan van Bentem, followed by Inga Rock, and then we'll go direct to Celine Lussato. So Jack, please go ahead.
Sorry, yes, from the Netherlands, a question regarding the real start. The postponement of the elections, of course, was a spark that was important, but also what the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei said on the 7th of May about united Palestinian resistance, and he was talking very specifically on precise missiles that would be used. Is there a very, I mean, it is said that Iran didn't play a very active role in this, but he was talking very directly on a conflict in Israel with the Palestinian resistance, aka Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as the one who would do it.
Okay, Inga, do you want to ask your question, Inga, if you're still with us?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for doing that. I've got a question for Madam Mayor. Your colleague, Deputy Mayor Aryeh King, was recently in Sheikh Jarrah, where he has been seen insulting an activist, an unarmed activist, telling him it's a pity that he was not shot in the head. Has this been discussed in the city council? Will your colleague face any kind of punishment for doing this, or has he been called to apologize? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Inga. Celine Lusato? Celine, I have your question.
Yes.
Yeah, you're with us. Hi.
No, I understand that according to you, it was just a pretext to cancel election, but why not simply authorize the holding of Palestinian election in Jerusalem?
Okay.
You know, that's a, we're not.
Sorry, it makes good sense to come back to you. Thank you, Celine, for that. It makes good sense to come back to you first on that, and then we'll finish up with Khaled. So Deputy Mayor, you heard your question there from Inga related to a specific case which I hadn't heard about some sort of dispute between people. Then the postponement issue, which kind of deals with Jack's question as well, the idea of, well, the postponement was the spark. So yes, the floor is yours, Fleur.
Well, I'll answer the question about the elections. I kind of agree with you, Inga, from a strategic perspective. Why not just let them have their elections? But I think it was not that Israel, I didn't hear, because journalists call me about this, I didn't hear like, we're not allowing elections in East Jerusalem. I honestly think it was like a default thing. They didn't ask, Israel didn't give permission, and they said, oh, they don't let us. But it wasn't, they didn't put the official, they didn't actually put any effort into getting the permission to begin with. And that's why they said, I mean, I had journalists calling me up and I said, and he said to me, is it true that the post offices are going to be closed? None of this was true. I honestly think the Palestinians just didn't do what they were supposed to do. And then they were just jumping and saying, you're not allowing elections. The cynical way to look at it is, you know, maybe we want to help the Palestinian, maybe we want to help the Palestinian Authority as opposed to Hamas. That's a cynical way of looking at it. Look, why are we helping Hamas get elected? You know, it's like we're between a rock and a hard place here. So I don't know what the real motivation was. I've got a feeling it's a kind of not misunderstanding, maybe a purposeful miscommunication that nobody wants to own up to. If you could just quickly ask me the second question, I forgot.
It was a question from Inga Fleur related to apparently I didn't catch the name, but a threat that was made about shooting somebody in the head.
Yeah, Aryeh King said that to Abu Hummus.
I didn't understand. I don't know about the incident. Somebody got shot in the head?
No, it was a very famous incident in the Sheikh Jarrah area, where Ben Gvir was together with also Deputy Mayor Aryeh King.
Yes.
And King said to Hummus that he was sorry that he was hit in his buttocks and not in his head. The bullet should have been here, he said.
Yes. So Aryeh King, who is another, the deputy mayors in the city, we're like a cabinet. Okay, there's more than one.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Aryeh King is one. He is a homophobe and racist. We have zero in common. He represents a very small fringe group that still manages to get elected into city council. And nothing that he does surprises me. Just to put it in context, 3 months ago, he got in trouble because he went to Balfour Street, where the prime minister lives, and punched a Jewish protester that was protesting against the prime minister, even though he actually hates the prime minister because he thinks that Bibi Netanyahu is too left-wing. You're talking about an unhinged racist, and I don't take what he says seriously. He's looking for attention. Let's not give it to him.
Yeah, no, let's move on from that. It sounds like a sort of unsavory fringe type character. Thank you, Fleur. Khaled, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Martin Hanser of EIPA, which is the main Austrian news agency, and he's asked the question which I don't believe we've touched upon yet. We've seen riots in Lod, in Haifa. How is it possible that Israeli Arabs are really sort of taking part in these riots now? Because hitherto there was a sort of reservedness, let's stay indoors or whatever, and now it seems to have boiled over onto the streets. What's been the catalyst for that? Why this time?
You know, why do we insist on characterizing them only as riots? What's wrong with holding protests?
Indeed.
What's wrong with demonstrating against Israeli policies? I mean, I see Jews demonstrating every day.
No, sure, but I mean, Khaled, specifically, we're talking about burning synagogues and setting fire to property.
Yes. I mean, these are incidents that are not representative. I mean, I didn't see thousands of people take to the streets and burn a synagogue. If 10, 15, 20, or 100 people burn the synagogue, then, you know, they are Israeli citizens. You should arrest them and bring them to court. But we should avoid generalizations. As I said, we live in a democracy. People have the right to demonstrate. If they want to demonstrate against, you know, the government, against the IDF, against the war, that's okay. And I've seen that many people were demonstrating peacefully. Now, unfortunately, these demonstrations have been hijacked by a group of thugs and people who are causing more damage to the Arab Israelis. So we need to be very careful and not characterize all these protests or all these demonstrations as riots or as anti-Israel protests. These are not people who want to destroy Israel. Not any Arab who demonstrates against Israeli policies wants to destroy Israel.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Khaled. Fleur, coming back to you so rapidly, because by Khaled's own admission, he's not necessarily an expert on the government machinations of what goes on in the government of Israel. So what does all this escalation mean to you, the process of forming a government? I mean, we spoke briefly about Bennett, we spoke briefly about Bibi, we haven't really touched upon Yair Lapid. I mean, does this escalation play into anyone's hands if you're looking at it purely and simply cynically?
Well, maybe, you know, Charles would be a fine thing that we have a government. It's been 2 years, for God's sake, 2 years of the country literally being split half-half, because otherwise somebody would have already created a government by now. So look, just like Corona created a situation where blue and white decided to join forces with the Likud and create a national unity government, if this is prolonged, there's a very good chance that there will be a national unity government. It may not last too long beyond the conflict, however long this conflict takes, and I pray to God that it's short. But if it does go on for a number of days, and the mandate of the because now the mandate is not in Netanyahu's hands, this situation may well cause a unity government the way that the Corona did last year. That's really all I can see happening right now. It'll depend on the length of this conflict.
Okay, well, we're going to start wrapping up shortly because we've been at this now for coming up to an hour and 25. Khaled, back to you. You said from the outset you were talking with your editor Yaakov this morning, and you said, you know, it feels like you're writing the same script 39 for the 39 years you've been covering this. Khaled, question is, how does this script finish, and where in your past experience, of course each conflict has its own dynamic, has its own natural endpoint. If you were to put on or look into your crystal ball, how do you see the situation resolving itself, if it resolves itself?
Are you talking about the current crisis?
The current crisis.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure, you know, there will be a ceasefire. It could take another day or two or 1 week, but we are already hearing all these reports about Egypt, Qatar, and the United Nations and other parties trying to reach a ceasefire. I have a sense, or I have a feeling, that Hamas and Islamic Jihad want a ceasefire. First of all, they've been dealt very severe blows. They've lost some of their top commanders. And secondly, they feel that they have already achieved their goal. You know, their goal was, or their immediate goal was, to retaliate against Israeli, quote, aggression, unquote, in Jerusalem. So they fired the rockets at Israel. They showed the Palestinian public that they are the defenders of Jerusalem, that they are capable of retaliating, that they care about Al-Aqsa Mosque. And for them, you know, mission accomplished. So I believe that, you know, it will be resolved. Now, there's always a larger context. You know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict. This conflict did not start, you know, last week. It did not start with the Palestinian elections. It did not start 20 and 30 and 40 years. It's been going on for many times. We will continue to see these outbursts of violence every now and then, because I believe that there is still a majority of people out there in the Palestinian world, in the Arab world, in the Islamic world, that has still not come to terms with Israel's right to exist. And I believe that this is the core issue. This is the essence of this whole conflict. And what Hamas is doing right now, it is trying to kill the Palestinians. Look, support me, rally behind me, because, you know, through violence, through jihad, we can liberate Palestine from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. That is their goal. That is what they are trying to achieve. And unfortunately, so far, they've been successful. My concern is that they are trying now to drag Israeli Arabs into this conflict by inciting them against Israel. And we need to be very careful and find ways to prevent them from doing that. But I would say that Hamas has already scored points with the Palestinian public. They look like the defenders of Jerusalem at a time when Mahmoud Abbas looks like a traitor, quote unquote, and someone who is conducting security collaboration with Israel. They have showed the Palestinian public that they are capable of, you know, sending millions of Israelis into shelters. They have, you know, all these actions have sent, or they, you know, they're being well received by the Palestinian public. When I see thousands of people on the at the Al-Aqsa Mosque chanting, "We are all Hamas, we are all Muhammad Dif," I mean, that's frightening. Even on the streets of Ramallah, there was, 2 days ago, there was a big demonstration in support of Hamas. So that's what Hamas is trying to achieve. But at the end, as I said, what Israel is facing are two Palestinian camps, one in Gaza and one in the West Bank. The one in Gaza is saying, Israel, give me all of the land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. I want to replace Israel with an Islamic state. And Mahmoud Abbas, who is sitting in the West Bank in Ramallah, he is saying, Israel, give me 100% of what you took in 1967, which means East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza. I want to establish a Palestinian state over there. And after that, I don't know anything. I cannot guarantee you, Israel, anything. So this is basically what Israel is facing right now. These two Palestinian camps. And fortunately for Israel, these two camps are at war with each other.
Exactly.
So Fleur, I'm going to give you the last word on this, but just to come back, because I could see you nodding your head vigorously to what Khaled was saying. But just if I can ask you quickly, we started off by saying that, you know, a lot of this was a distraction for the cancellation of the election. And if that's the case, and what Khaled was just been saying, that this has strengthened Hamas's hand, this must have been then an abject disaster from Mahmoud Abbas's point of view. If he was trying to use trouble at the Al-Aqsa Mosque as a kind of distraction, if anything, he seems to have strengthened his opponents. Where does he go from here? And what does that mean for you? You know, a strengthened Hamas vote potentially in East Jerusalem and next door to Jerusalem in the West Bank.
Well, I just think the Palestinians are fed up of Mahmoud Abbas and his family and all the corruption. They're just fed up. I'm friendly with many peace activists on the Palestinian side. Some of them were going to be running for election, not with Abbas. They think, of course, Hamas is the worst thing to happen to the Palestinian people, but they don't have a better example on the other side or anybody they can really work with. And I completely agree with Khaled. The existential issue is that they continue to lie to their people. The leadership, both leadership, but also Palestinian Authority lies to its people, and also Hamas lies to its people by telling them, guys, don't worry, one day we're going to kick all these Jews out and we're going to liberate the whole land. It's in their school books, it's in their songs, it's in everything. The obsession with the right of return is really ingrained from when these are children, which leaves no room to discuss a two-state solution or anything like that. Whatever they say in English you know, whatever Mahmoud Abbas says to an international audience, it doesn't matter. They're still teaching their children that one day the whole of. So I think the main thing is having leaders who are, and I believe the new generation, we can get there, having new leadership where people have accepted that Israel's not going anywhere, and that the only chance forward for this region is to accept that nobody's going away and create a situation where everybody can live in peace, in dignity, self-determination. That's really the only way forward. I don't see it happening with any of the current leadership, but I do have hopes. I know some younger people my age and younger, who are interested in living as good neighbors with Israel side by side. And I just pray that these people one day get the political power to be able to take over and be the leaders that the Palestinian people should have had for a long time ago.
Madam Deputy Mayor, I think that is a perfect place to wrap things up. Thank you to our speakers. You can see from my colleague Daphne has just posted that if you want to find a recording of this briefing, you can find it on our webpage. The details are in the chat, and I'm sure our media advisors will send it to you anyway. So it remains for me to thank once again, Madam Deputy Mayor, and also our friend and EIPA Press Association regular and respected columnist and writer Khaled Abu Toameh. Tal, is there anything you want to say before I start wrapping things up?
Just that we thank you all for joining us today. And if you have any other questions, as Alec just said, all of our media advisors, David Kalfa, Katya Bayer, Oliver Bradley, Yossi Lemkovich, and all our staff, both in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, Rome, and Israel, are at your service. Please feel free to call us.
Okay.
Well, I would like to just, I'm Oliver I'm currently in Rome. Just to let you know, the previous press briefing we had was on the Palestinian elections. So for those of you who could not attend, go to that link that Daphna put on the chat and take a look at that, because it might also help build more perspective into the current conflict.
Thanks, Oliver. That was a good point. Okay, guys, thank you for joining us. And yeah, we hope this situation resolves itself fairly quickly. It's been exhausting for everyone and thoroughly depressing. But this is what we do, and we're here to give you what we hope is a balanced and informative perspective. We wish you well. We hope to welcome you again to another EIPA Press Association briefing soon, and we're always ready to help. Thank you again to everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.